Are back here with Bruce Nestor, civil rights attorneys, and he just came back from a trip from Istanbul, Turkey, about the international conference about freedom and human rights. We were talking before we leave here about how the West welcome dictators, support dictators, that they are stifling freedom of expression and any dissent. And when there is a crime committed by a non-Western, Muslim or whatever, it is an assault on freedom of expression, assault on democracy, an assault on Western civilization. This is really a dichotomy or duplicity that it just doesn't settle in. I know it's tragedy. We should mourn these people who were killed. You know, I'm in the media. They were in the media. That could have been me or someone else. But the reaction of the West and all that, and barbaric and anti whatever, this is something, you would think people in your conference talked about, you said you didn't go there as, enforcing universal value of the Western value, but did they talk about this at all?
Very much so. I mean, and it's the double standard. It's refusing to deal with the barbarism within our own society. So when the United States bombed Yugoslavia and bombed a building holding journalists from Al Jazeera in it,
is this an assault?
That's an assault on journalists. When journalists are killed in Colombia, which receives enormous amounts of U.S. military aid, that's an assault. And it's those we need to become aware of the role that we play in other countries and not to allow incidents of violence to be manipulated to really support the barbarians who run so much of the national security establishment in the West. Because these attacks, I think, really feed both the most reactionary fundamentalist violence that's trying to attack the West, as well as the most reactionary and violent elements in the West that want to impose their will on other parts of the world and refuse to acknowledge the historic role of Western countries, of European countries, in supporting dictatorship and violence around the world.
And in the issue of freedom of expression, and the West, this absolutism of their secular value, freedom. And I talk about it, it is like democracy is like a new religion, a new, this is the freedom of expression crusader or Taliban. And in fact, freedom of expression is also stifled within our own system here. The whistleblower, the people are jailed for expressing themselves, and the FBI and CIA stifling people from talking about certain issue, and jailing professor for expressing their anti-Israelis or anti-whatever. So how are we doing here in our own system?
Well, I mean, very poorly, both on the level of freedom of expression. There are young men in prison in this country because they run a cable television program and they wanted to allow the Hamas cable television channel to be shown. There are men in prison because of what they view on the internet. There are people who commit torture, who are teaching at law schools here in the Twin Cities, who promote torture, who wrote legal definitions supporting torture. There are entire security forces in this country that were active in promoting torture that have gone unpunished. And so I guess what I see as the basic problem is you don't have any legitimacy when the message appears false to people who are not swayed by propaganda. So when you condemn something like what happened in Paris, but at the same time you allow impunity of your own torturers and your own bombers and your own people that carry out violence, that you don't have any legitimacy, and it degrades the value of speaking out against violence and of speaking out for universal values of democracy and freedom of expression, because they just appear to become tools. They just appear to be manipulated for propaganda purposes when you support violence and dictatorship in some countries, when you have impunity for your own torturers, and then you selectively raise this condemnation of particular acts. And it really, as someone who believes in freedom of expression and believes in democratic values and believes in human rights, it's offensive to see them manipulated for propaganda purposes.
It really, strike me, and this has happened in the last 2 days, 3 days, that attack in Paris, the reaction of the West, and even average people. And I know politics is politics, the states and manipulation, but the people themselves acting, gathering. It's almost was like a Tahrir Square,
Yes.
when people were, rised up to topple a dictator of their own. Those people are rising up for some secular value that they believe in him the same way as Taliban. And I just feel the sense of extremism and absolutism in the reaction of the secular West, which is as oppressive as the extremism of the religious and Islamists and Taliban and ISIS and all that.
But it's clear, mainstream French opinion has never come to terms with the fact of colonialism, that they butchered people in Southeast Asia, that they butchered and tortured people in Algeria and fought a bloody colonial war and withdrew only when they were defeated. They've never come to terms with that
until
in French
today.
society, until today. Again, do you believe everything you hear? But on Democracy Now! I hear that the French Parliament recently passed a law that French schools have to teach what the benefits of colonialism were. And they, have never come to terms with the fact of what the French role has been, whether it was bombing the Rainbow Warrior, the Greenpeace ship that they bombed near Australia. The role of the French is not one of upholding universal values of secularism and freedom of debate. The role of the French is one of collaboration with the Nazis of much of French society and trying desperately to hold on to colonialism when they lost it after World War II, and doing it in a bloody, violent way. The mainstream French opinion has to come to terms with their own history and not the myth of their own history as defenders of freedom and equality.
So how could you fool a whole population? How can you develop that culture when people now have access to information, have access to everything? So is this, I know you say it's a manipulation of some elites that they're benefiting from that, but also the people themselves have the tendency to believe that. They want to believe that. I mean, even the liberal here in the West or in the United States, that they, champion of freedom of expression and they against dictator and despotic regime in the Middle East, they feel those people in the Middle East helping to be like me. They feel that they have a universal value that everybody should really adhere to it. So we are here in the West, would like to believe that. So we ignore history. So it's not manipulation in the sense that people are helpless and they just, no, the people are not. They have access, they know, but they want to believe that.
And those are complex questions, certainly, right? But the people that run a particular country at any particular time, I think, shape what the governing themes and ideology of a society are. And so, we still have this myth in our country of settling the West and of exploring new frontiers, not of rapacious robber barons sending out, railroads, because those robber barons have built the James J. Hill Library in St. Paul, and it's a monument to wonderful technology, and our art and culture are housed within it.
It comes on public television.
Absolutely. And so they shape the narrative, and what we really need to do is, recover our own history and understand what that history really was about, not just the people that made it and shaped it. And today, part of it's talking to people, that understanding that when a terrorist is killed by a drone, that terrorist still had a full life and can be defined by things other than being a terrorist. Mm-hmm. First of all, we don't know they're a terrorist, other than that maybe somebody in the CIA determined that they were, but they have women, they have, they're married, they have family, they have a whole rich experience that brought them to that point that they're at. If they're committing violence, that doesn't mean I support that, but it's like we have to understand why conflict exists. I utterly reject the idea that the West is being targeted because people don't like our values of freedom and democracy.
Envious.
The West is being targeted because of what we have done to other countries. And that doesn't mean how the reaction is appropriate. That violence drives more violence.
And we're not justifying or excusing the horrible crime that is committed against innocent civilian, whatever, by...
Exactly. In no way, I'm not justifying or excusing the crimes carried out by the U.S.
This is a different issue.
But it's not even defensively saying, oh, we condemn that.
No.
I primarily condemn the barbarism and crimes carried out by this government
that led
dollars.
to this.
Absolutely.
And the idea that somebody go and shoot and kill 12 and whatever and get killed because of a cartoon, it's a bizarre, secular, racist assumption.
Yes.
To me.
Yes.
And ignoring the facts, ignoring the fact these guys were French. They were born in France.
They were a product of French society.
Yeah, culture, drugs, and all kind of violence and all this. So it seems like we are, we try to attack some people for some behavior that we're actually doing ourselves. Extremism, bigotry, absolutism, and that kind of things.
Very much so. And I think there are certainly forces in the United States, in what we call the West, that also want to drive that level of confrontation, and that their agenda is almost furthered by attacks. And the way what happened with the journalists in France is then manipulated and used to justify an expansion of security and crackdowns on what are really marginalized populations.
One last thing from in your conference there in Istanbul, there's a lot of talk now about what's happening to the Brotherhood in Egypt, and a lot of violation against their leaders and even the rank and file. Was there a topic? Was there something was talked about or discussed?
It was. I think that a lot of the emphasis, there's a feeling that it's so difficult to operate inside Egyptian society right now, that the level of repression is so extreme, that Sisi has essentially consolidated international support now. Even some of the Arab countries like Qatar that were not supporting him have now kind of bent and given in. He's consolidated support in Egypt and the West. So a lot of the focus of the conference was shifted to what can we do to use international legal mechanisms to try to hold some people to account. And that might then be a means of working to actually get people out of jail and get people out of prison and support the movements that are going on in Egypt.
Thanks so much, Bruce.
Thank you.
Bruce Nestor is coming back from Istanbul for an international conference for human rights and freedom, and we'll see you next week. Assalamu alaikum, and God bless you all.